5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Welcome to the Big Picture Reveal Show, and today the talk is about synchronicity. And we have Michael O'Connor back to guide us in this new exploration of synchronicity. So Michael, welcome back to the show. It's good to have you.
Thank you, Tyson.
And we're on track today. Everything's working. Technology is all lined up. Must be the moon and the stars are all cooperating.
There you go. That's a good intro to synchronicity right there. Synchronicity, that word, which means, can be described basically as meaningful coincidence. And by putting the word meaningful in front of the word coincidence, we're entering into a different mindset than the normal linear material physics. I always like to differentiate now. I've come to this place where I'm going physics, materiality, linearity, if you like, represents a kind of a paradigm which of itself is valid. It's just not conclusive. The mainstream scientific model plays with that as a conclusive, and then the notions of metaphysical principles, which include synchronicity, suddenly become poo-pooed and secondary, but they're actually measurable. Synchronicity is measurable. So it's just bad science to simply sweep it aside. Well, it's like saying that's not my religion. I don't believe that. But it's measurable, and synchronicity is exciting in that regard. And astrology is a fantastic tool to measure synchronicity. Measure it. So synchronicity is a term coined by Carl Jung, the great psychologist, and he himself was more or less interpreting probably a more ancient principle called the law of correspondences, which is a Hermetic teaching. So way back from Egypt would be the idea, and it includes 7 main principles, just like today we have the 7 laws of success and this and that. It has mind, correspondence, vibration, polarity, rhythm, cause and effect, and gender. Those would be the 7 ancient principles of the law of correspondence. So synchronicity is connected to the law of correspondence, which is itself linked to ancient mystical or metaphysical. I like to differentiate between mystical and metaphysical. Metaphysical is more like the science of mysticism. It's more of an application, where mysticism sort of lends this notion sometimes of unfathomably mysterious. So we don't want to get into unfathomably mysterious too much. The science of metaphysics wants to give a science to the principle of mysticism. But it needs to do that from a place of a non-linearity, meaning not merely physics. Physics is push-pull logic, and it's sort of it plays with notions that time is a dimension, which it probably isn't time. Okay, but we won't go into that. That'd be another show. What it goes into is that we live in a multidimensional universe, and that we're multidimensional beings. And that's the key phrase, the key understanding of the ancients, the perennial philosophy, etc. So one more thing. So Carl Jung, who was a student of the ancient teachings and who was a student of astrology, he took that alternative route to understand what he was seeing and experiencing, and he decided, you know what, don't tell me how I need to pursue truth. I'll find it my way, and I'll be a good scientist. I'll be a good student of life, and I will observe. That's what Carl Jung's integrity is largely reflected by. And then, of course, he was a voluminous writer who shared his many ideas, but mostly he coined the word synchronicity to represent the principle of the law of correspondence, which is also defined as above, so below, as within, so without. It's kind of like a double axiom: as above, so below; as within, so without. And those two phrases become axiomatic for metaphysics. When you say as above, so below, it's the beginning of synchronicity astrologically. We see the planets and in various alignments in various times of the year, and then we see correspondences. That's what all is about. We go, oh, we notice a pattern when the planets are in this alignment, whether it's the full moon or what have you, and there's a correspondence in our experience here. Perfect. To physics, that shouldn't exist. No, that doesn't work. It can't according to our model. That's why I always say, well, your model must be quite limited. When we say as within, so without, now we're starting to see a more esoteric principle yet. It's they're both very at par, as above, so below, as within, so without. But as within starts to talk about inner dimensionality. So dimensionality, it's a paradoxical phrase because you can think of dimensions like layers, but the paradox is it's often defined more accurately as inner layers. In physics, they're seeking the Higgs boson, or they sought it. They didn't ever fully disclose whether they found it or not, because what they found, I think, either confounded them or was too complex to explain. I'm not sure, but apparently they found the Higgs boson, right? But they realize almost in a hush-hush, we're almost embarrassed kind of way, that there's more to it than that. I don't really know the whole story, but the main point is that's the desire to see deeply within the material realm, which is a very valid thing on one level, on the high side of it. Others criticize that for various reasons, like it's dangerous. But on the other hand, the dimensionality, the as within, shows levels of what would be, in effect, consciousness. What I mean by that is that we don't just simply have consciousness in this metaphysical understanding of things. We literally not only have consciousness, not only live in consciousness, both being true, but we are expressions of consciousness. It's important to say that we have it, but we don't just live in it, because that suggests separation. But when we understand we are expressions of consciousness, now we get into a realization of what would be a divine principle. That we are not only in creation, again, a separation principle is there, but we are expressions of creation, which means oneness, right? So when we get into oneness principles of existence, we are celebrating that we're getting closer and closer here to how and why synchronicity works. Okay, oneness meaning that there is an intimate, intrinsic relationship between the inner and the outer, the above and the below. The linear mind sees more us and them here and there. It's a spatial particles study. And it's a really good study. Again, the problem is it has usurped an exclusive position on reality. That's the problem with it at worst. So we want to celebrate physics and all of the study of the deeper realms of the material dimension, but for it to claim exclusivity on truth is a kind of theft, usurpation, lie. It's a type of selective perception. It's the makings of conspiracy. It's like, who gives who the authority to decide what? You know, um, it's all, we've talked about this before in previous episodes. The kind of the mandate of science as the rebel who's against the authoritarian of the church. So instead of your dogma, we have our dogma. It's like, okay, right. So that's what it basically comes down to. We're replacing your dogma with our dogma. That's what, at worst, the staunch position of materialism, physics, holds. So in saying that, we're not dismissing physics, but we're recognizing it as an aspect of consciousness. It's an aspect of existence. So the metaphysics here of synchronicity is that it represents, like the law of attraction, a constancy. Like in other words, existence is like a symphony of synchronicities. You know, that we live, all of existence. Synchronicity means meaningful coincidences, all things coinciding in existence, cosmically, molecularly, and everything in between. As Nassim Haramein says so well, he says, we are the event horizon. We're the midpoint between the small and the large. And I think he's really right on with that. Brilliant. We are that event horizon. So we're that line between the small and the large. But what's woven into synchronicity can be in what the religious tradition says or refers to as the plan. Like it's on purpose, right? Existence is on purpose, and everything in existence functions as aspects of an ever larger whole. That's what holism's about, as we, holes within holes within holes, a whole cell, a whole person, a whole planet, a whole solar system, a whole galaxy, a whole, holes within holes. And so we get into this correspondence principle. And so that's, synchronicity is not anomalous. It represents that reality, the flow of consciousness manifesting as existence. That's the basic understanding. Existence does not come from some big bang, random, arbitrary moment. It's a manifestation of an intentionality, a plan, whether you're referring to the mind of nature, if you like, however you wish to refer to it. It's an intelligence. It has an intention, a creativity, a plan, a design. And it's very ironic, as we mentioned last time, that science is kind of like, well, we don't like the notion of calling it an intelligent design. And it's like, you got to be kidding. You got to be absolutely kidding. That's all I got to say. It's like, did you just say what I think you just said? You are pretty bright. You study complex things in nature. You're a doctorate in science. You know now that you know less than you thought, because now you're a doctorate. Now, if there's one thing you learn when you know a lot, is that you don't know a lot. But you're telling me that you are subscribed that nature does not have intelligence woven into it. And if it does, you're suggesting, therefore, maybe it happened arbitrarily. Is that what you just said? It's kind of like, well, you gotta be kidding, is all I gotta say. You gotta be kidding. It's like, almost like you spent a lot of time convincing yourself of this nonsense. Really? It's nonsense. To me, I mean, it just seems like, wow, that's kind of like a lot of wool you're pulling over yours and everybody's eyes. It just makes no sense. I'm not religious, really. To tell you the truth, I'm not. I honor religion. I honor whether you're Buddhist, a Christian, Islam, whatever, right? Don't put it in my face. I honor the devotional principle. I honor that sacredness that people celebrate as religion. I'm not really that religious as such. I'm more of a spiritual scientist. The religion to me is, you know, a deep sense of oneness with existence. It's communion. It's like I don't want to be hurt by you, and I'm sure you don't want to be hurt by me, right? It's the golden rule, right? Anyway, I'm more interested in a spirituality, if you like, a science of spirituality. That's what metaphysics is, I think. That's what basically holism's about. It's the science of spirituality, but spirituality need not be blubbery and emotional, like all blindly, oh my God, you know, kind of thing. There's something to be said about rapture. There's something to be said about reverence. There's something to be said about all emotional, you know, feverish convictions, but we shouldn't make any one of them it, right? There is a lot to be said about using our reason, our intelligence to endeavor to define mysticism, if you like, or realities that defy linear logic. So I say these things. The reason I come forth with this is because synchronicity is very much a term that belongs in the arena, at least. I don't want to say it's owned by, because it's not, let's say astrology, no, but it belongs, it resides well in that arena. We appreciate that there's a synchronicity as above, so below. You know, we see the correspondences. They happen, though, in a way a physicist has to understand. It's not happening in the push-pull way you think it is, though. It's not happening in the linear push-pull mechanical way you might be assuming. This is where we get as within, so without. And this is where we get into a principle of a plan. And we realize that it's not merely happening as an event. It can be an emotion. You know, there's a fine line between when in existence, we're always in the flow of reality and events. But synchronicity is not merely showing like concrete outer events. It's like flows of existence, flows of destiny. It shouldn't just be sort of some isolated. It's a bit tricky. You have to think differently than isolated sort of events. In other words, synchronicity.
Maybe one of the ways of thinking about it.
Yeah.
Synchronicity is that it's always present.
Exactly.
And therefore, that above, so below, and as within, without, is the way things are. Where the separation is that we're so busy in whatever interpretation we have about what is or isn't, that we exclude ourselves from the synchronicity that is in front of our eyes in every moment. And therefore, we think it's arbitrary. We think, oh, wow, that was out of the blue. No, it's just more like we showed up out of the blue by being present in the moment so that we could see the synchronicity.
Exactly.
The synchronicity was always there.
It's exactly, that's a good, yeah, it's like the Tao. It's the flow. It's the rhythm and flow of existence. But we, in our mind, naturally want to identify things. So in a sort of an artificial sense, we kind of are isolating them and kind of, in a certain amount of sense, wanting to fixate them as something in time and space that's somewhat static, if you like, labeled. Okay, you know, it doesn't, you know, like, of course, in existence, in life, there, you know, everything's moving molecularly and cosmically, etc. But, you know, doesn't mean everything in the room is flying around. You know, it's a bit of it's a trick. You have to appreciate that synchronicity isn't just like some magical. They show in like movies sometimes where, you know, aliens come and all of a sudden things start flying around the room. Spielberg is good at that. He kind of wove principles of, you know, anomalous activity like electricity going haywire, and you know, weaving metaphysics. So I watch the movies and I'd like to see through what I'm seeing. I'm like, well, that's a mesmerizing bit of production, but that it's a nice little wonderful creative endeavor to produce an idea of like, oh, there's some synchronistic magic happening, but that's a contrived illustration. A genius, brilliant. I'm not taking away from the creative genius of that. I really take my hat off to it, really. It was quite clever, but it's not quite what we mean. So you said it well. In the flow of existence, synchronicity is a constant, just like the law of attraction. They go well together. The law of attraction, which incorporates a co-creative function. And it has this quality. The law of attraction is a really wonderful movement on the high side, where it's a celebration of the synchronicity, but also that we are not merely in creation, we are expressions of creation. So the law of attraction people on the high end, and I'm going to say on the high end because there's a low end in my view, but on the high end, it's trying to say, hey, you have co-creative power, and energy flows where attention goes. And you know, the basic formula of synchronicity, of law of attraction, is clarify your desire, focus, affirm, or affirm, focus, and visualize. You know, those are basically them. When I say the high end of law of attraction, it's the principle of co-creation. The danger of the law of attraction is that it weaves into popular culture, and we start to use it to attract merely and purely shallow things, which are not wrong to want things, money, possessions. It's good. But I would myself say the high end is to focus on what would be authentic evolutionary growth. You know, like, in other words, let's not lose sight of the ends while we're busy attending to the means and the ends, right? Like food, clothing, shelter are valuable necessities, but they remain means. You know, they're the tools of life, but they're not the end. That, you know, kind of begs the question, well, if food, clothing, shelter, etc. is the means, what's the end? And this is where we get kind of like a Maslow principle of self-actualization. I think he was right. It's meaning, what he's meaning is to fulfill your destiny, you know, to
Yeah, the interesting part about that is in fulfilling your destiny, you can't totally fulfill your destiny without helping others fulfill theirs. So again, you know, you're in a holistic, interdimensional world where the illusion of separation is one of the biggest challenges to overcome.
nice.
So if we get caught up in that manifestation principle that somehow I can better myself by having more goodies at the expense of somebody else not getting there, so I better learn how to manifest better. This is the point where we will all get there better if we manifest collectively. In other words, we're making it a better world to live in.
Very well said. Beautiful. Yes, it's yes, the law of attraction and so forth. Ideally, it weaves in higher principles. You know, there's personal growth. Personal growth is overcoming attachments, manipulations, and addictions. Basically, we could say assumptions. Okay, but I think the three are attachments, addictions, manipulations. Those three. It's very human of us to rationalize by our attachments, which can manifest as our addictions, that it's okay somehow to manipulate, where the higher word, you just said it so indirectly, is cooperate. Cooperate and manipulation is sort of a fear-based tactic, and or we can say fear, we can go into what's fear, we can get into greed. It starts going down the rabbit hole, right? We won't go there, but just to say what fear is, it's covetous. And again, it's very delicate politics, because it's natural and wholesome to need things and to want a certain amount of space, like one's own home, right? One's own domain to be creative, to eat, to live, right? So it's got a lot of validity to celebrate the material stuff of life, right? But don't lose sight of the purpose, which is contrary to the whoever dies with the most toys wins kind of principle, right? Some people, it may well be their destiny to have a lot of toys, and I'm not trying to be judging people's values, of course, I really am not. But the point is, there comes, you said it well, for it to work in its highest vibration, it invariably includes a process of contribution, right? You said. And I would agree with that fully. It's not merely an ethical thing. It's more of the way I like to think of the existence is it's more energetic. It's almost like, it's like physics that way. It's energetic, but its energetics ultimately is consciousness. It's not, that's what Aquarius, the symbol of Aquarius is about in its highest vibration. That all things not only have vibration, but they have consciousness. That's what Aquarius's highest message is. The glyphs, everything's vibrating. But that deeper, that's where we get into the deeper root of within, is that the vibrational principle, which we can measure as protons, neutrons, electrons, in motion, producing a vibrational frequency, but which is again physics, and that's fine and good, but it's deeper than that. And that's where the only way we can prove that that's there, or no, I shouldn't say the only way, because I'm not sure what the only way is. I don't mean that. What I mean is, it explains how astrology works. I've said this before, and I want to just say it again briefly. Astrology, the planets in the solar system, in the model of physics, won't work because the assumption is that the planets are sending some kind of special cosmic ray or some kind of cosmic energy. It's very physics. It's like, no. It's like you almost want to go, no, we got to go back to the beginning. We have to understand that, for example, the as within means there's a plan, there's archetypal principles, there's archetypal, call them divine principles or laws that are behind the very existence of a solar system. It's not a random construct. It's not like, oh, how wonderful that it arranged itself this way. Then they'll go, well, the law of gravity is pretty fantastic, isn't it? And you go, yeah, that's pretty awesome. So at what point is it random? And why is it random? That's always the bottom line question. So synchronicity is a word that looks randomness, which in modern vernacular is coincidence. That's the word. Coincidence is the backdoor word. That's the everyday colloquial, how are you? Oh, that was a coincidence phrase of superficial, everyday chit-chat, shallow. Okay, it's a coincidence. Let's go. Okay, so if you want to live at that level of consciousness, that's fine. But the deeper reality is synchronicity represents meaningful coincidence, which, in other words, all things in existence exist by coinciding, right?
Yeah, I like what you said.
Thank you. Yeah, all things are coinciding, coexisting, co-manifesting as a part of a larger process. So automatically, the coinciding of all things is linked to something meaningful. And that's the whole idea, is that there invariably is meaningfulness woven in to the otherwise what's called lower mind, everyday chit chat, kind of, let's keep it simple. We don't say to somebody on the street, how are you, for them to go into a monologue about their existence. It's, fine will do, and I'll be on my way. You're here, you're alive, you're present. Okay. Nice, right? If it want to go into a deeper story, we're going to have to set up a different kind of situation, whether you're, going to the coffee shop or going to the psychologist or the astrologer, if you like, or whatever. Anyway, the point is that there's a deeper reality, and the synchronicity represents meaningful coinciding of events, and the word meaningful has to go to an all-embracingness. It has to embrace. You can't start going, oh, that's kind of got meaningfulness and that kind of doesn't. In our life, we make value judgments that, that penny on the floor is meaningless to me. Okay, kind of thing. Okay, fine. Right. Okay. It's not, there's no reason or value for you to expend any energy to get that thing or what. Okay, we got that, right? But these are just ego projections. This is called, surface consciousness, ego projection line, which is where most of us generally function. It's not wrong that in everyday we're in our ego body, here we are, but we're not in a discussion of deeper truths or realities. And we don't want to dismiss those for that surface kind of activity, right?
Yeah, I like, again, what you're saying, the real dichotomy here in the synchronicity. Like you say, on one level, we can just say, well, it's arbitrary coincidence, it just so happens, and, we can sort of let it go. On the other side of the coin is that when we're fully present and alive and aligned in the moment with the whole, or holistically present, then the synchronicity becomes like second nature. It's like a fish in the water. And the synchronicity is now profound. It means you're in the right place at the right time for the next best step. It means you're in the part of the divine flow. It means that you are moving through life with ease and grace in an effortless way. So in one level, we can throw it away as nothing, but pure coincidence. On the other, when we step into the truth of it and align ourselves like as above, so below, and as within and without, then it's like we're living in an auto-magical world where everything is pure bliss because there is no effort.
That's the principle of the Tao, isn't it? When you're living in a flow, and there's the other words like trust and faith and attunement and all kinds of serendipity words come forward. Yes, I agree with that. It's also accepting when the synchronicity is hazardous, and that life shit happens kind of thing is there too. That's where it's a little harder. If we were to look at the computer screen, we're not going, oh, that's a coincidence. Oh, look at that's happening. Oh, that little thing's going across the screen. Oh, that's a coincidence. It's like, no, the computer functions off of an inner logic. Everything on the screen is linked to an inner program, right? We can see that on a computer. It becomes like, duh, yeah, no kidding. But, but we can't easily take a leap and say that that's happening in existence. We kind of have made ourselves into God. We've made ourselves into, like, okay, maybe that's fine. Maybe at this juncture of evolution of human social existence, civilization, whatever you want to call it, we're meant to step into the God role, to be, okay, we're now the big God, right? I mean, we're going to be the creators, and we're going to decide what's what, and we're going to control the weather, and we're going to kind of decide, listen up, nature. We're taking over from here. You can just sit back. We're going to take over from here. And it's like, no, you're not. You're going to get to a certain point of creative ingenuity on the high side. Let's not underestimate the genius of it. Really. But no. But that's, we could try our best to take it as far as we maybe, and, there's something to be said about that. I don't want to underestimate that. And I think that's what I heard somebody say it the other day, and I thought, oh, okay, I didn't hear it quite that way. They said the age of Aquarius is the age of man replacing God. And I thought, that makes sense. In the sense,
it makes sense.
Yeah.
I think we are truly gods in potential. I mean, the fact that we are trying to create the world that we live in, by controlling the weather and doing all sorts of crazy things from what we think is a rational scientific methodology, when we don't really have a clue what we're doing, because we're just, the lesser of a huge, gigantic number of cycles of which we're interdependent, and to think that we can step out of that and then manipulate all the other, serendipitous cycles to work in our favor is really naive. However, if we assume the role of God in potentia, which means we're responsible for the whole, every bit of it.
Beautifully.
And then we have a responsibility and an obligation as an earth steward. Now we're playing a different role.
Nice.
Now every action, we're responsible for the consequence of it, which is truly what we're being confronted with right now. Instead of our naivety of a little boy playing with fire that doesn't know what it's all about, if we become the being that understands what Prometheus and the fire gods are all about, and takes on that responsibility, we have to step into it. And I think that this is the age of Aquarius. Are we going to be the naive child on the block, or are we going to be the Prometheus, and play with the fire and learn the consequences of that, and become truly human, right?
Yeah.
Truly,
yes.
a
Yes.
God
Yeah. You are so there. That's exactly a wonderful way of saying it. It's I just want to qualify something. When I say God, I'm not. It's very tricky. You have to always remind we have to remember we're conditioned beings. And the tendency, if you're Judeo-Christian, is to have in the back of your mind a Judeo-Christian image of God, which unfortunately is kind of, depends on your belief exactly, but it's kind of a man and a furly-browed, lightning bolt thrower in some respects, or it looks like Jesus or something. And it's kind of like, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about divine intelligence pervading all existence. We're talking about something more than we can anthropomorphize. So I just want to be clear that, and I know you're there. I know you're thinking that. Just for the listening audience, that we're not referring to some anthropomorphic deity. We're talking about the expression of a higher power that's intelligent, intentional, creative, purposeful, loving, conscious, cooperative. Those are good words. Those words, that's what we are meant to be. All of those things. Intelligent, intentional, conscious, creative, cooperative, loving, and you said it also, responsible. Right? So if we in this day and age, and I appreciate that about science and technology, we say, look, we can create things that are helping us to not be at the mercy of nature, right? And that's a wonderful thing. The issue is more, it starts becoming political, right? About what, if just because we can, should we? Kind of politics, right? But that immediately sits right next to ethics, you know? But then if your ethics isn't bound in a deeper model of metaphysics or consideration like we're talking about, we bring forward principles of synchronicity, as above, so below, as within, so without. We begin to understand a deeper principle within existence, then ethics will just become a debate of politics. It won't have it. It's like it's lost its meaning. It just becomes righteous. It becomes, yes, you will, no, you can't. It's like it loses its ground of true dialogue where we're really appreciating that various, for example, fields of human endeavor like physics, material science, or metaphysics, on the other hand, can and do coexist. And the
We have an
yeah.
interesting question here from Kenneth Maharaj. He says, "Are we responsible for synchronicity?"
Good question. In a way, I think what you said it earlier, Tyson. So the best way I might define that is we are responsible for cooperating with synchronicity. Events coincide and they have meaning. So our job, and you were sort of hinting at it, is to engage in the flow of things with our humanity, which includes, reasonable, simple, everyday things like common sense and rationale and, I put common sense in the word parentheses, by the way, and I don't want to get caught on that tangent too much. I just want to say that we shouldn't assume what common sense is. And that's common sense, once again, is a physics notion. In other words, I'm not so interested in common sense. I'm more interested in good sense myself. I like to aim for, what I interpret. Anyway, so the answer is, are we responsible for synchronicity? I'll say the answer is yes. We in our mortality are not the source of synchronicity. We in our mortality, in our embodiment, are responsible for how we handle the motions and flows of existence and how we create our own stand in it individually and collectively, and we're already doing that. So the answer is yes, we are responsible for it in how we handle it, but as humans, we're not the source of it.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. We're not responsible for it, but the more we become aware of it, the more it's available for us, and the more it's available for us, it's the more available for others around us. So it's a way of, while we're not responsible for it, when we nurture it through our awareness, if it becomes part of who we are in our field of awareness, then our life takes on more ease and grace, not only for us, but for everybody else around us. And so it's sort of like creating a new way of being in the world. And maybe that's what the age of Aquarius is maybe that water element is that fluid flow, that when we participate in that fluid flow, we get to have the benefit of it. We really become like the wizard in helping create the flow and seeing the benefit of the return flow to us. So we're not responsible for it, but we certainly get to play with it.
Yes, yes, yes. A comment here on the word, the language can get a bit tricky. What I interpreted out of what you just said there, Tyson, is our job is to consciously cooperate with it, right? We're dancing with it. It's the dance.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, the cooperation, because a dance implies and requires a conscious, deliberate, cooperative process, shall we say, right? Especially if you have two people dancing, they have to deeply
Yes.
cooperate. Okay, but when we say responsible, I want to just be clear about something. There's a difference between a sense of responsibility to self and others versus are we the cause of it?
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about causality here, right? The scientific model of causality is physics, Big Bang, and ergo everything else subsequent, right? Okay. The metaphysical notion of causality, but it's really it's the word's almost the same. It's called the causal, the cause, and that's a very important point of departure here, because in the Hermetic principle, the seven Hermetic principles linked to the law of correspondence, the first one's called the law of mind or mentality, which is the notion that everything's ultimately mind. When we go deeply into the mind, we get into what would be the divine, what is actually called the causal dimension, which can be described basically as the dimension of archetypes. It's also been defined as the dimension of the mind of God. Now, we're getting into that dangerous area of God, right? And we have to try and open ourselves past particular projections. But we get into the idea of that there is ultimately, because we are it experiencing itself, but the paradox is that we're, in duality, so we're in the game of it. So all from the standpoint that we're all collectively a part, like particles of God, if you want, cells or features, whatever, sparks, all the words, we're a part of it, the cause. So the differentiation is simply the difference between the cause or source of synchronicity versus the human reality of being responsible as a human being, right? So that's all I want to differentiate, clarify. Uh,
Yeah. Well, but
yeah, it's just because the language gets a bit tricky, but in causality or the causal dimension, where archetypes or the mind of God, the plan, the blueprint of existence is ways of that it's been described as what Plato's all about. We would say that dimension would be the dimension from which that which we're experiencing as synchronicity emerges. It comes from that place. According to Vedic tradition, the God source itself, the source of that, is even deeper within existence. They say, again, there's a word higher versus deeper. It's like saying, like the high priest or the pope is higher. But what we really need or a valuable consideration is, no, let's talk about deeper, you know, like, anyway.
or more, maybe more inclusive.
More inclusive is a fantastic term for that. It's, what I get from when I hear you say that is like the beautiful symbol in astrology of the sun, which is a circle with a point in the center. It's also known as the monad, and it means the point in the center and the circumference around it are one and the same. It's a paradox, but they're one and the same. And when one studies the circle with the point in the center, it actually can literally be a university course lasting a whole year to study that one principle, because it's so richly diverse. It's such the beginning of a vastly interesting discussion. Like, for example, the nucleus is surrounded by the electron, or the sun is the nucleus of the planets, or the point in the center expanded represents the circle on the circumference. And it goes on. Or the point in the circle in a three-dimensional image is like the light at the end of the tunnel.
Or it's the 0 point in the center of the sun.
Or the
which
zero.
Is the vortex.
There you go. Or the 0 point in the center of the sun, which is an origin point. Is that what you mean by vortex?
Absolutely. It's, it's the creation, it's the birth, and it's the death. It's, it's the point of departure and arrival, depending on which way you're coming at it, right?
Yes.
The inside out or the outside in.
That's
so
it.
It really is the point at which when you spin it, you end up with, and look at it, it's the yin and the yang again.
If a course like that would be better not as a debate, but as a exercise of thinking. I think debates are good, but it's win-lose. And win-lose has its place. There's lots to be said about a game where there's an objective, but there's also exercising as an end in itself. So an exercise of perception, and the circle with the point in the center is a really good one for that. Your yantra symbol behind you above your head is a perfect example, and as is the flower of life symbol, and as is, the zodiac symbol behind me with the earth in the center, as would be the case, because it's from where we experience life. So yeah, that's synchronicity. That's a good, jab at it. I don't, by no means have we, finally defined it, but we're getting into meaningfulness, and it connects itself to the law of attraction. It connects itself to principle of destiny, which is linked to that we live in a conscious, intelligent, intentional universe. And it represents that there's a rhyme and reason within or behind it, or however you wish to say it, within it all. And it awakens, as you've been suggesting indirectly and ever so well, a divinity. And that divinity is us and we're it. So by this discussion, we're activating our divinity, aren't we?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it becomes
we are including ourselves in the drama.
Exactly. And yes, exactly. So the paradox remains, we're souls incarnate, and we're in the time-space dimension, and we have to interact with the world in all its politics, and we invariably have pleasure and pain, etc., right and wrong, good and bad, here and there, but pleasure and pain, and it's our teacher. So cooperation is not merely an ethical thing to do. It's just the most responsible, wise, naturally intelligent thing to do, because the synchronistic flow of things, I don't want to get off onto a whole row and round, but when the sun is at a certain place in the seasonal round, the flowers of that season come forward. Is a nice basic way of describing it in a very, concrete sort of manner. It gets a bit more mystical when you start realizing that, for example, the position of the moon when you were born, the phase, the aspects it's making to other planets, and so forth in your astrology chart explains your emotional nature and describes how your mother was and what your relationship was and what you're carrying psychologically about that. Now that is a different level of conversation. It's measurable, it's demonstrable, And only a dogmatic religious mind who is afraid to investigate things from a purely truth-oriented, sincere consciousness will reject it. They will go, I'm not programmed to compute what you just said. I have been programmed to think I am seeing things objectively. Therefore, I subscribe to my program, and I am very intelligent, by the way. So you must be wrong. It's like, you got to be kidding, right? And that's what we deal with. That's what we're dealing with. And I, as an astrologer, I kind of look to myself and go, oh my God. I know it comes across as sort of a cynicism, but it's actually kind of an expression of being flabbergasted at the lack of objectivity to one's own conditioning. You know what? I have to say, there's another little thing that I just got, a little pet peeve that grabbed my attention the other day. There's this guy on TED. He's really brilliant, a really good talker. Gotta hand it to him. But he says, I'm a neuroscientist, and we study the brain and this and that. And he says, well, I'll tell you what. I went into an operating room and they put me under anesthesia, and I woke up and I didn't know anything between the time I was put under and the time I woke up. And therefore, there's nothing else. When we die, it's over. I looked at it and I thought to myself, that is the most ridiculous conversation I have ever, eloquently spoken, ridiculous bit of nonsense I've heard in a long time. But congratulations, you're really eloquent about it. But because you just paralleled dreaming or out-of-body consciousness or anything to being under anesthesia. And I was a little bit like dumbfounded. I thought, did everybody just buy that? I sure didn't. I thought, okay, buddy, well, you're good. That's called, you should go to the mathematics class. They make up things there too. So.
Well, thank you very much for a wonderful discussion on synchronicity and the important role that it can and does play in our life, whether we're aware of it or not. Hopefully, we all become more aware of it. Mm-hmm. Exciting times are upon us, like you say, with the age of Aquarius, and understanding the role that we get to play or not play. But hopefully we are waking up to the fact that we can get to play, that this is an interactive universe and that it's ours to play with. That sounds pretty exciting to me.
It sure does to me too. Thanks, Tyson. That's awesome. Great synopsis there too. So thank you very much, everybody. Thanks for being here, and look forward to next time. And that's on Thursday, isn't it?
It is. Same time, same place.
Thursday.
That's 1 p.m. Pacific time, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard. We're back on schedule. We're just going to all the technology. We'll be seeing you then.
Okay.
And so until then, have a great week.
Okay.
Everybody.
Goodbye, everybody. Thanks.
Bye for now.
Thanks, Tyson. Bye-bye.